He paid for seat 1A, but the flight crew said he didn't belong. What happens when the most powerful man on the plane is treated like he's invisible? And what if he doesn't raise his voice, but raises a movement? Dr. Elias Monroe, the calm, calculated CEO of Apex AeroTech, boards a routine flight one he helped build, brand, and lead. But 12 minutes after sitting in first class, he's confronted, doubted, and publicly humiliated, not because of a ticketing error, but because of something far more disturbing. So he doesn't shout. He listens, he documents, and then he grounds the plane. What unfolds next isn't just about one man standing up for himself. It's about accountability at 30,000 feet, and what happens when quiet strength meets corporate injustice head-on. Will his actions spark change or cost him everything he built? And when dignity is challenged in the sky, who truly has the right to fly first? If you believe respect should never be a privilege, hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Let's dive into a true story that took off in silence and landed in history. The gate attendant barely glanced at him. "Boarding Group 1, you may now proceed." Dr. Elias Monroe stepped forward, quietly slipping his phone into his coat pocket. He wasn't flashy. No designer luggage, no gold wristwatch, just a neatly folded navy trench coat, a soft gray sweater beneath it, and a leather briefcase scuffed at the corners like it had stories of its own. As he moved through the jet bridge of Apex Air Flight 214, bound from San Francisco to New York, his footsteps were calm, unhurried. His seat was 1A, first class, window. The cabin lights were dimmed, casting a warm hue on the plush seats. He paused for a moment at the entrance. The flight attendant, a tall woman with sleek blonde hair pulled back into a polished bun, narrowed her eyes. "Sir," she said, hesitating as she looked at his boarding pass. "Are you sure this is your seat?" Elias gave a soft smile, offering the pass between two fingers. "1A," he said simply. Captain Terrence Doyle was adjusting his cuffs near the cockpit and overheard the exchange. He turned slightly and made his way over. Tall, square-jawed, with salt and pepper hair and the posture of someone who believed in ranks, not questions. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked the attendant. "Possible seat confusion," she replied curtly. The captain eyed Elias, not with curiosity, with calculation. "You traveling for business?" he asked. Elias nodded. "In a way." He didn't elaborate. There was a flicker of something dismissal, maybe annoyance in Doyle's expression. He took the boarding pass from the attendant and squinted at it like it might be counterfeit. "Sir, do you have priority verification or elite traveler credentials?" Elias met his gaze. Still calm. "No, just the seat." The captain gave a slow nod and handed the pass back with 2 fingers, just barely brushing Elias's hand. Then he looked at the attendant again. "Go ahead and keep an eye," he muttered. Elias stepped into the cabin, placed his briefcase under the seat, and settled in. The man across the aisle, Brad Whitmore, glanced up from his phone. Slicked back hair, dark blue suit, a platinum badge on his lapel that screamed money more than status. He looked Elias up and down. "Economy is just a few steps back." "Pal." Elias didn't respond, just opened his book, as if those words hadn't just landed like stones in the middle of the cabin. The murmurs began, subtle but present. A couple in 2C and 2D leaned closer together. The young woman near the galley glanced up with a raised eyebrow. A teenage boy in 1B pulled out his phone and tilted it ever so slightly. Elias saw it all but said nothing, because this wasn't a surprise. Not to him. For the past 6 months, Apex AeroTech had been quietly running internal audits across their aviation subsidiaries, Apex Air included, Flight 214 was part of the Ember Protocol, a covert ethics audit program Elias himself had designed to monitor systemic bias on high-tier flights. No camera crews, no staged tests, just reality, as raw and unfiltered as it played out. This was the final flight in the protocol, and Elias had chosen to board it himself, not as CEO, not as a founder, not as the visionary behind Apex's rise as a global aviation leader, just as a passenger, an ordinary black man in seat 1A. The point was never to provoke. It was to observe, to watch how people reacted when you stripped the title, the suit, the safety net of power, and left only presence. And so far, it was textbook. The attendant's skepticism, the captain's tone, the passenger's silent judgment, the questions disguised as protocol. It wasn't rage that simmered in Elias's chest. It was recognition. A voice crackled from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our taxi shortly. Please remain seated." Elias glanced at the overhead screen. 12 minutes until takeoff. He looked out the window. A child's reflection stared back at him from the glass. A little boy in coach, leaning forward in awe. Their eyes met for half a second, and the boy gave him a tiny wave. Elias raised his hand slightly in return. That moment grounded him more than anything else, because it reminded him why this mattered. This wasn't just about him. It was about what the seat represented, a place of belonging, a place of dignity, and right now, that seat 1A was being challenged. "Excuse me, sir." The flight attendant was back. Her name tag read, Marissa Lane. She held a tablet in one hand and had that look apologetic but firm. "I'm going to need to verify this reservation one more time," she said. "We've had some ticketing inconsistencies today." Elias tilted his head. "Are others being re-verified?" She hesitated. "Just you." He said nothing. Instead, he reached slowly into his jacket, tapped his smart ring twice, and spoke softly into his collar. "Dana," he said, "Protocol Ember, confirm activation." A calm voice returned in his earpiece. "Confirmed. You're live." And with that, Elias leaned back in seat 1A, hands folded, eyes steady. The game had just begun, and nobody knew who they had just tried to push off the plane. For nearly 2 full minutes, Marissa Lane stood silently by the aisle, tapping at her tablet like she was waiting for something to load. But she wasn't. She was stalling, glancing at Elias every few seconds as though his very presence in seat 1A created static on her screen. Elias didn't move. His legs were crossed calmly, and he kept his attention fixed on the book open in his lap, even though he hadn't read a word since she arrived. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Monroe. Correct." He nodded once, not bothering to repeat his name. "I'm still not seeing any elite profile connected to your name," she said. "I'll need to confirm with the gate team. Until then, I'm going to ask that you wait in the front galley or step into economy for a few moments. It's standard procedure." There it was. The rephrased removal. Softened in tone, but sharp in intent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. He simply looked up and asked, calmly, "Are you removing any other passengers from first class today?" She blinked, hesitated, then smiled, polite, performative. "No, sir. Just a temporary verification issue across the aisle." Brad Whitmore gave a loud snort and muttered, "Nothing temporary about confusion." The woman in 2D, a stylish executive in her late 30s with an elegant updo and reading glasses, looked up from her laptop. She said nothing, but the flicker in her expression said she noticed. Not just the exchange, but the tone, the tension, the imbalance. Still, she stayed silent, Marissa exhaled sharply through her nose and reached down to pick up Elias's briefcase. "I'll place this up front for you, sir." But Elias's hand moved, gently but decisively, landing on the handle first. "I didn't say I was leaving my seat," he said. She froze, not expecting that. Captain Doyle's voice came from behind her a moment later. "What seems to be the delay?" Marissa turned, keeping her voice controlled. "We're still waiting on profile confirmation. He's not listed in the elite system." The captain stepped forward, towering now just beside Elias's row. "Sir," he said, "we'll need to ask for immediate compliance. The aircraft can't depart until all discrepancies are resolved." "Discrepancy?" Elias repeated softly, like testing the weight of the word. He looked around slowly, then gestured toward the man across the aisle. "Have you asked Mr. Whitmore for his credentials?" Doyle's jaw tightened. "He's a recognized priority client." "Because of the badge he wears?" Elias asked. Whitmore leaned forward, lips curling. "Because I don't look like I just wandered out of a rideshare app," he said. The jab was sharp, cruel. The air shifted again, tense. Elias looked back at Captain Doyle. "So, just to confirm," he said, voice low but clear, "you're instructing me to give up my seat without cause, without violation, without verification, based on the word of your attendant and nothing else." The captain's voice rose slightly. "This isn't about race, sir. It's about procedure." Elias smiled faintly. "Then follow it." He handed over his ID. The captain looked down at the card, then at Marissa's tablet. A beat of silence. Still no match. That was the point. The Ember Protocol purposely booked all flights under masked credentials, alias names, non-elite categories, no executive flags. If staff treated everyone equally, the system passed. If they didn't, the results were recorded, backed up, and fed into the audit in real time. "Security will be notified," Doyle said finally. "If you don't comply, we will escalate." Elias didn't flinch, then escalate. He said. A quiet gasp came from someone in the second row. At that moment, the teenage boy in seat 1B tilted his phone further, capturing every word, every facial tic, every micro-expression. His name was Cody Lynn, a 17-year-old student flying to New York for his college interviews. His mother had booked him the first-class seat as a graduation gift. He wasn't trying to stir trouble, but he knew something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Dana Rios sat at her console at Apex AeroTech headquarters, watching the dashboard spike. The system had flagged staff denial without cause, manual profile override attempt, passenger flagged non-priority visual mismatch. She froze. That was the term. Visual mismatch. Not an official label, of course. It was an internal code Marissa had used 5 times before flagging passengers whose appearance, attire, or vibe didn't match first-class expectations. Dana reached for her headset and called Elias directly. "Sir," she said into his earpiece, "Marissa used the mismatch code on your profile. I'm locking the entry and initiating shadow compliance logging now." Elias nodded subtly. "Understood," he whispered, back in the cabin. Whitmore leaned in again. "You know, I paid over $4,000 for this seat," he said with a smirk. "You sure you're in the right tax bracket for this section?" Elias didn't even look at him this time. Instead, he looked toward the cockpit. Doyle was already reaching for the intercom when another voice spoke up. It wasn't loud, but it carried. From 2D, the woman with the glasses. "Excuse me, Captain," she said, standing up. "I'm not sure what you're seeing, but from here, it looks like a man is being asked to prove his worth because you don't like the way he looks." The captain's hand froze near the console. "I'd advise against escalating this further," she added. You're being filmed, and people are watching." Cody blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to speak. Neither had Marissa. Neither had Elias. The woman sat down quietly. No grand statement, just accountability. The plane remained grounded, and the tension only grew. In Elias's mind, an old memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought about in years. He was 15, standing in a store, holding a model airplane kit he'd saved up for all summer. A security guard had followed him down every aisle. At the register, the guard accused him of hiding parts in his jacket. They searched him, found nothing, but they didn't apologize. Just stared at him like he should be grateful for the absence of handcuffs. Elias had gone home that night and dismantled the kit. He never built it. He built something bigger instead, and now, all these years later, he was sitting in a $70 million aircraft he helped design, being told again that he didn't look like he belonged. Except this time, he wasn't going home silent. He was bringing the whole system with him, one verification at a time. The hum of the engines outside had grown faint, barely audible under the sharp silence that had taken over the cabin. Marissa Lane stood frozen near the galley, her tablet still in hand, but her authority faltering. Captain Doyle hovered near the cockpit, his fingers no longer touching the intercom button. And Elias Monroe remained seated, calm, still, and quietly watching. No shouting, no outbursts. But the pressure was unmistakable, like the moments before a storm. From the last row of first class, a young woman with dark almond eyes, shoulder-length hair, and a camera bag tucked beneath her seat slowly raised her phone. Her name was Nina Cho, 29, Korean-American, a travel journalist whose blog had grown a loyal following for its mix of soft stories and hard truths. She had seen injustice before, in airports, in hotels, in lounges where smiles thinned when her last name didn't match her boarding group. But this moment felt different. She'd seen the way Elias was spoken to, the lack of eye contact, the assumption that he didn't belong, the quiet reinforcement of power from uniforms and badges. Nina tapped her phone. Recording, just in case. She zoomed slightly on Elias. The man had barely moved since he sat down. But everything about him radiated something unfamiliar, something most wouldn't catch at first. It wasn't arrogance. It was stillness, the kind that made you wonder if the people around him had any idea who he truly was. Marissa finally broke the silence. "I'll return to the gate and recheck the manifest," she said sharply. "Until then, I expect everyone to remain seated." Elias didn't respond. He simply nodded, as if giving her permission to leave. Captain Doyle muttered something under his breath and turned back to the cockpit. Cody Lynn, still in seat 1B, angled his phone more openly now, as if emboldened by the woman in 2D. He wasn't live streaming. Not yet. But his thumbs were working fast, typing something into a draft. From the other side of the aisle, Brad Whitmore crossed his arms with a dramatic sigh. "This is what happens when you let just anyone into first class," he said to no one in particular. The woman in 2D gave him a long look, unimpressed. "You're not helping," she said flatly. He smirked. "I'm not here to help." Elias exhaled slowly and looked out the window again. On the tarmac, he saw a ground crewman pause, glance toward the cabin windows, and keep walking. For a moment, Elias let his mind wander back, not to trauma, but to the reason this mattered. He had created the Monroe Protocol for situations exactly like this. Not for vengeance, not for headlines, but because data didn't lie. And neither did silence. Too many reports had come in. Black engineers denied access to staff lounges unless they wore company-branded gear. Latina executives asked to step aside during check-in because their surnames weren't recognized. An Asian American pilot mistaken for crew support. 3 times. It always started with a glance. a question, a delay, and then it bloomed into full exclusion. Elias was done watching. Dana's voice crackled softly in his earpiece. "Sir, the live protocol stream just passed 5,000 viewers, internally only, but they're watching." Elias nodded. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Nina's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A message from a friend in journalism. "Saw your flight update." "You filming this?" she replied with one line. "Yes, this is going to be something." Across the cabin, the tension had grown into discomfort. A woman in seat 3A leaned to her husband and whispered, "Shouldn't someone call corporate?" Her husband shook his head. "It's probably just a mix-up." "No," she said softly. "That man knew exactly what he was doing, and they didn't like it." Back in the cockpit, Doyle was speaking into his headset. "I need a ground team to confirm Seat 1A's booking, passenger Elias Monroe. No profile match on our elite manifest. Passenger is non-compliant." A pause. Negative attitude. Refused to relocate. He waited for a reply. When it came, his expression stiffened. Elias could see it through the open cockpit door. Doyle turned and locked eyes with him. "You're interfering with aircraft procedures," he said, voice louder now. "Final warning." Elias tilted his head, as if weighing the words. "Procedures," he repeated, then added quietly, "only become threats when applied selectively." The woman in 2D looked down. She was typing. Nina tapped her screen. The red button glowed. "Live now." The caption read, "Black man asked to leave first class. No ID check. No reason, just removed. This is Apex Air 214. You tell me if this feels right." Her viewer count spiked within 60 seconds. 300, 800, 700. Elias hadn't looked at her once, but he knew someone would capture this. The only question was, would they understand what they were seeing? Not a confrontation, not an argument, a test. And it was unfolding, line by line, in public view. Dana's voice came through again. "Sir, Brad Whitmore's profile just flagged. His Apex priority badge expired 9 months ago. He's not on the current elite list." Elias raised an eyebrow slightly. "I'm logging it," Dana added. "Should I alert compliance?" "Yes," Elias said quietly. "Let's see how deeply this runs." From his seat, Brad noticed Elias looking at him. What he snapped. "Still pretending you belong here?" Elias responded for the first time. "No pretending required." Whitmore laughed. "Then prove it." Nina's stream exploded. Comments poured in. "Tag Apex Air. Post the crew. Call FAA. This is wild. Passenger is just sitting there. They won't stop. Back in the cockpit." Doyle's radio buzzed again. A long pause followed. Then a second officer stepped out. His name was Cole Vickers. Young, serious, and newer to the crew. He approached Elias slowly. "Sir," he said, tone lower. "Can I speak with you quietly?" Elias gave a small nod. They leaned closer. "I don't agree with what's happening," Cole said, "but I've been told to prepare a removal report." Elias studied him. "You still have a choice," he said softly. "The difference is whether you're standing in integrity or standing in the way." Cole didn't reply, just walked back toward the cockpit and closed the door. For a beat, the cabin was quiet again. Then Nina's phone buzzed. Another journalist, this time from a national paper. "DM me. We'll pick this up tonight. Don't stop filming." Elias adjusted the sleeve of his sweater and tapped his smart ring once more. Dana answered immediately. "Sir, confirm escalation." "You're sure?" "Yes." Elias replied, "It's no longer a question of observation. It's time they understand what leadership actually looks like." Dana's fingers flew across the dashboard. At the front of the cabin, a small chime echoed from the display screen above seat 1A. A notification appeared. Compliance Notice Internal Review Protocol activated. Passengers looked up. Brad scoffed. What the hell is that? Elias sat taller in his seat. Calm, still silent. The entire cabin was shifting, not through noise, but through clarity. Elias Monroe didn't shift in his seat, but something within him had... It wasn't anger that changed the shape of his silence. It was resolve. The kind that came not from instinct, but from years of understanding how systems were built and, more importantly, how they were allowed to rot. He leaned back slightly and let the moment stretch. The screen above seat 1A still displayed the notice. Compliance Notice Internal Review Protocol. Activated, most passengers had no idea what it meant, but they felt it. A change in the air. Like something previously hidden was now watching them back. From her seat near the galley, Marissa Lane stared at the screen with confusion creeping across her face. She wasn't used to having her actions questioned, especially not mid-flight, especially not by someone she was sure didn't belong. She tapped her tablet quickly, trying to clear the message from the crew interface. It wouldn't go away. She tried again. Still there. Dana Rios watched it all from her console at Apex AeroTech's San Jose headquarters. The compliance flag that had been triggered was one of the rarest in their system. Only executive authorization could activate it from inside a flight cabin, and only one person in that aircraft had that authority. Dr. Elias Monroe, CEO, founder, architect of Apex's current era of innovation. A man whose name was known in global aerospace circles but rarely photographed. Quiet, strategic, determined never to become the face of the company, but rather its integrity. And now he was being asked to vacate a seat in a plane he owned. Dana's screen filled with data points in real time. Passenger record access tampered by Marissa Lane. Visual mismatch flag applied without basis. Elite badge authentication failure. Brad Whitmore. Captain override attempt logged. Security alert pending. Every entry was time-stamped, saved, immutable. The system had begun documenting everything, not just the actions, the intent behind them. Back on the plane, Elias gently placed his book back in his briefcase and folded his hands. Captain Doyle reemerged from the cockpit, expression tight. "We've been advised by the terminal authority that a compliance check is underway," he said to Marissa. Marissa frowned. "But we didn't file anything." "That's the point." Doyle replied, his voice lowered to a whisper. "Someone else did. At the back of first class." Nina Cho's phone buzzed again. Her stream had passed 20,000 viewers. Comments flooded in. Who is this guy? Why won't they say his name? Why does he look like he's already in charge? She wasn't sure what to say. She just kept filming. In seat 1B. Cody Lynn looked toward Elias again. "Sir," he said softly, "do you want me to stop recording?" Elias turned to him, his expression kind but steady. "No," he replied. "Keep going, but not for me. For everyone else." Cody nodded and angled his phone back toward the aisle. That was when the security lead arrived. Rick Stanmore, broad-shouldered, late 40s, a face that looked carved from stone. He wore the black Apex security blazer with the crimson trim and a badge clipped to his belt. He marched down the aisle with purpose, and the moment his eyes locked on Elias, he slowed. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to ask you to stand up and step into the galley." Elias didn't move. Under what grounds, he asked. Rick raised an eyebrow. "You've been flagged as a possible non-ticketed passenger." "That's false," Elias said. Rick nodded toward Marissa. "I'm acting on her authority." Elias paused, then spoke into his collar. "Dana, confirm compliance code for security intervention." Dana's voice responded in less than 2 seconds. Security code override active. Rick Stanmore is unauthorized to proceed under internal flight review. Rick looked around. Who are you talking to? Elias turned to him calmly. To your oversight. Passengers around them had stopped pretending to be uninvolved. Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. No one said a word, but every breath was heavy with anticipation. Rick leaned in closer, lowering his voice. You don't want to make a scene. Elias stared at him for a long moment. I don't need to. Marissa stepped forward again, her face now flushed. This is escalating beyond reason, she snapped. This man hasn't shown any proof of elite status or credentials. Nina spoke up, her voice firmer now. Maybe because he doesn't need to. Marissa turned toward her, eyes narrowed. Are you involved in this? I am now, Nina replied, holding her phone higher. Because the internet is watching, and you've crossed more than one line. Rick stepped closer to Elias. Stand up, sir. Now. Elias didn't blink. You're making a mistake, he said, and you're refusing a direct order. No, Elias replied. I'm refusing an unjust one. Rick reached out, grabbing Elias's arm roughly. There was a collective gasp from the cabin, from the corner. A child whimpered. An older woman said loudly, That's enough. Elias didn't resist, but he didn't allow it either. He gently pulled his arm back and stood up on his own. I will not be dragged, he said. Rick pointed toward the galley. Move! Elias walked forward, but just before crossing into the galley space, he turned toward the passengers. His voice was calm, but firm enough to carry. This flight is now under formal internal investigation. He held up his left hand. On his smart ring, a soft pulse of light flickered. All actions from this moment forward are being streamed to the Corporate Compliance Board and legal review. Rick froze. Captain Doyle stepped back into the cabin, eyes wide. What do you mean streamed? He asked. Dana's voice crackled through Elias's earpiece. Elias, visual telemetry just activated. We have live cabin footage now. Multiple media outlets have picked up Nina's stream. It's on trending. Elias turned toward the flight crew. Return to your positions, he said. This situation is no longer yours to manage. Marissa's voice broke slightly. You don't get to tell us how to run this plane. Elias turned to her. I don't. He stepped forward, slowly, letting each word fall like stone. My name is Dr. Elias Monroe. I am the founder and CEO of Apex AeroTech. This aircraft was designed under my leadership, and this very protocol, this audit you just walked into blindly, is my creation. I'm not just another man in seat 1A. I'm the one who built it. Silence. Complete. Crushing. Unmistakable. Passengers sat frozen. Rick lowered his hand. Marissa took a step back. Doyle looked like he'd swallowed his own tongue. From the rear, a slow clap began. Just one passenger. Then another. Then it stopped, not because people didn't support it, but because the mood wasn't celebration. It was realization that something much bigger had just happened, that the rules had changed, and everyone on that plane now had to answer for what they'd chosen to ignore. The cabin lights flickered briefly, then steadied. Outside the window, the early morning sun had begun to push through the overcast sky, casting a faint orange hue across the tarmac. Inside, the cabin of Apex Air Flight 214 was frozen in a moment that would be remembered long after the plane landed, if it ever took off at all. Dr. Elias Monroe remained standing near the galley, facing the crew and a dozen stunned passengers who had just learned his name, his title, and the quiet truth behind his calm defiance. Marissa Lane said nothing. Captain Doyle swallowed hard and turned back toward the cockpit without a word. Rick Stanmore lowered his hands slowly, then stepped back as if space itself now belonged to someone else. Elias returned to his seat. He didn't look victorious. He looked heavy, like someone who'd carried this moment for a long time. When he sat down, he didn't reach for his phone or his ring or his book. He simply closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he disappeared inward into the space where decisions are made, not from pride, but from clarity. That place where a man asks himself whether the world truly deserves his patience. Dana Rios's voice came through the earpiece again, quiet and respectful. Elias, FAA is monitoring the flight in real time now. Legal's reviewing every log entry. We have 6 misconduct violations already filed. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he whispered a single question. How deep is this going to go? Dana paused. We're not sure yet. That wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the one he expected. He opened his eyes slowly. Across the aisle, Brad Whitmore sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, eyes locked on the window like it might provide an escape route. He hadn't said a word since the reveal, but Elias knew that silence well. It wasn't remorse. It was calculation, waiting to see if power still protected him. A ping echoed from the cabin display screen. Another update live internal review, Phase 2 activated. The screen showed no logos, no fancy graphics, just white text against a black background. Official, cold, unavoidable. Passengers shifted in their seats. The woman in 2D leaned forward again, eyes sharp behind her glasses. I assume this means we're not taking off anytime soon? Elias looked at her. No, he said quietly, but we are going somewhere. She smiled faintly. Good. At the rear of first class, Nina Cho ended her live stream, not because the moment had passed, but because the internet had already captured it. Her post had crossed 80,000 views. Dozens of journalists were DMing her for permission to use the footage. Several had already confirmed the identity of Elias Monroe. She wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in what came next. She opened her notes app and began typing. Elias Monroe. The man they tried to remove from his own aircraft. The man who never raised his voice. Who never cursed. Who never begged. And who never backed down. Meanwhile, Captain Doyle stepped into the cockpit and shut the door behind him. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the control panel, not because he feared Elias, but because the playbook had disappeared. The structure he'd built his confidence on had collapsed in real time. The voice in his headset belonged to someone from corporate, not Dana, not legal, someone higher. Captain Doyle, you're being monitored under a live review. Do not make further contact with the passenger unless instructed. His mouth went dry. For the first time in years, he felt like a passenger on his own flight. He leaned back in his seat, stared at the controls, and wondered quietly, painfully, how many times he had gotten away with something like this before, and how many of those people had names he never learned. Marissa sat near the galley, her tablet clutched in both hands like a lifeline. The override locked her out of all internal systems. She couldn't see passenger data. She couldn't adjust logs. She couldn't even open the cabin service schedule. She stared blankly at the screen. A part of her wanted to cry, but another part, deeper and harder, burned with resentment. He had tricked them. That's what she believed. He came in quiet, unmarked, no badge, no sign of power, just like all the others who tried to fake their way into first class, except he wasn't faking. And now, because of him, everything she'd built, every internal ranking, every pristine flight report was unraveling in public. The system had turned on her. But Elias wasn't thinking about her. He was thinking about the boy in coach, the one he saw through the window before takeoff, the one who waved. Elias had been that boy once, watching from the cheap seats. dreaming of a day when the front of the plane would feel like home. And now, standing in it, he realized something heartbreaking. It never had, not fully, not without challenge, not without suspicion, not without proof, always proof, of competence, of status, of belonging. And now, even with all he had accomplished, they still asked him to prove, to show receipts, to verify what should have been unquestioned. He whispered again into his collar. "Dana, pull all crew complaint logs from the past 5 years. Cross-reference them with flagged entries by Marissa Lane and Terrence Doyle." Dana didn't hesitate. "On it." Then, softer. "Are you okay?" Elias exhaled. "I'm tired, I know," she said gently. "But this matters, I know," he replied. "That's why I'm still here." He looked around the cabin again. The passengers had stopped pretending to scroll their phones. They were watching now, not with pity, with awareness, and that, more than anything, gave him strength. Back in seat 1B, Cody Lynn pulled out his laptop and began uploading the video clips he'd saved. He wasn't a journalist. He was just a kid with a camera. But he'd seen something. Something his future professors might one day teach in ethics class, a man standing for something invisible, yet undeniable. Cody added a caption. They thought he was just another passenger. They were wrong. Elias folded his hands again. Outside, a second crew vehicle pulled alongside the aircraft. Inside, the lights dimmed slightly. He knew what was coming next. An offer? An apology? A quiet request to de-escalate, to let them take off, to settle things behind closed doors. But he had already decided there would be no closing of this door. Not this time. Not ever again. The cabin door remained shut, but inside, the air had changed completely. What had started as an isolated moment now pulsed with something bigger. Tension, yes, but also truth. And truth had a sound of its own. It was quiet, watching, waiting. Captain Terrence Doyle hadn't returned from the cockpit. He was still on the line with Apex AeroTech's oversight office, trying to make sense of how control had slipped from his hands. He was the captain, yet with one name, Elias Monroe, that power had vanished. In the first-class galley, Marissa Lane sat rigid, her tablet resting blankly on her lap. Her face was unreadable, but her knuckles were white around the stylus she no longer used. The locked interface had left her helpless, and the silence from the rest of the cabin crew made it clear they were distancing themselves from her now. Passengers whispered now without lowering their voices. "This is wild. He owns the whole airline. Did you see how calm he stayed? You'd think the CEO would be up in a private jet, not right next to us." Elias heard it all, every word. But his gaze never left the window. Inside, he wasn't distracted. He was calculating. Every second they delayed takeoff added weight to the moment. Every whisper, every pause, became part of a pattern Apex had ignored for too long. Dana's voice returned in his earpiece. "Elias, we pulled 5 years of crew reports. What do they show?" He knew the answer already, but he asked because the data needed to live beyond memory. 18 complaints filed under Captain Doyle's name. 17 dismissed or sealed. 4 of them carry patterns flagged minorities seated in premium cabins, all classified as disruptive or non-compliant without further details. Marissa worse. She's used the visual mismatch code 37 times since implementation. 25 of those cases were Black or Hispanic passengers. Only 2 were ever corrected, both after public pressure. Elias closed his eyes. It wasn't just bias. It was strategy. This wasn't ignorance. It was a system designed to protect itself. Save everything, he said. Forward to legal and compliance. Already done. And media, they're already knocking. At that moment, The cabin display screen flashed again. Live media monitoring enabled. Internal legal briefing in progress. A collective murmur rippled through first class. Someone near the back let out a low whistle. Brad Whitmore's voice cut through it. "This is absurd." He stood suddenly, straightening his blazer like the movement alone might restore his authority. "I've flown Apex for 10 years, priority status since the beginning. No one questioned me." He pointed at Elias, "But this man shows up out of nowhere. No badge, no rank, dressed like a weekend professor, and we're all supposed to bow down." No one responded. Brad pressed on. "You all realize this is performance, right? He planned it, set a trap. This whole thing's a media stunt." Nina Cho stood now. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her phone. She just looked him in the eye and said, "If it was a trap, maybe you should ask yourself why you walked straight into it." Brad turned red. "You're not even in this. You're just some blogger hoping for views." "I'm a journalist," Nina said evenly, "and I report what happens when truth makes people nervous." Brad opened his mouth to fire back, but Cody Lynn spoke first. "I'm 17, he said, and I knew from the moment they asked him to move that it was wrong. Brad looked at him, confused. "What do you know about any of this?" Cody shrugged, enough to recognize when someone's being treated like they're invisible. The woman in 2D clapped once, softly. "Enough," she said. She looked around the cabin. "Let's stop pretending this was ever about a seat." She turned to Elias. "You shouldn't have had to do this." Elias met her gaze. "But I did." A silence fell again. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Doyle stepped out. His face was pale. He walked slowly to the front of the cabin and addressed the passengers. "We've been instructed by executive leadership to remain grounded until compliance review is complete." A pause. "That includes legal oversight." He didn't say Elias's name. He didn't apologize. He just folded. Marissa stepped forward. "I'm requesting passenger Elias Monroe provide proof of ticket purchase and personal identification." Elias stood. His voice was quiet. "You've seen my ID. You've had it since I boarded. Then why did your profile not appear in our elite manifest?" Elias's tone didn't change. "Because I instructed my staff to book the flight under a basic fare." A ripple moved through the cabin. "I boarded without privilege, without title, without expectation, because I wanted to see if our policies matched our promises." He looked directly at Marissa. "And now I have my answer." Marissa bristled. "I was following procedure." "No," Elias said, shaking his head. "You were following perception." He turned slightly toward the rest of the cabin. "There is a lie we've accepted for far too long, that how someone looks, or how they dress, or how quietly they walk into a room tells us whether they belong there." He paused. "I designed this plane. I designed the systems behind your safety. I built this company from nothing." He glanced back at Marissa, and still, I had to prove I was worthy of sitting here. A man in row 3 raised his hand halfway. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." Elias gave him a nod of gratitude. Then, from behind, Rick Stanmore returned, but this time his voice was lower. "I've been told to inform you that your seat has been re-verified and approved. Dr. Monroe." Elias didn't sit. "Is that all?" Rick looked down. "There will be follow-ups." Nina raised her phone again. "You mean consequences?" Rick didn't answer. Elias finally took his seat. Not with drama, not with ceremony. He sat because the point had been made. Then, with measured calm, he tapped his ring again. "Dana, yes. Prepare to ground this flight until formal statements are taken and crew audits submitted. There was a long pause. Then her answer came. Copy that. Confirming protocol. 3. Escalation. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. From the display screen, a new message appeared. Flight 214, delayed until further notice. Internal audit in process. Some passengers groaned, but most didn't. They knew this wasn't just about the delay, this was about the shift. And that shift had a name, Elias Monroe. The engines remained idle. Outside the aircraft, the sun had fully risen, casting soft light through the cabin windows. But inside, the atmosphere hadn't relaxed. If anything, it had grown heavier. Passengers didn't speak in full voices anymore. They whispered in half sentences, eyes darting toward the front of the plane, where a man, quiet, poised, and unflinching, had changed everything without raising his voice once. Elias Monroe sat in seat 1A, hands folded loosely on his lap. His expression was unreadable, not because he was distant, but because he was focused, present. Every detail around him mattered. Every breath in the cabin carried the weight of something shifting. Captain Doyle stood at the front, still clinging to the illusion of command. His eyes flicked from Elias to the screen above the aisle, which continued flashing. Flight 214, delayed for internal review. Protocol 3, active. He turned back toward the passengers. I understand this delay has caused concern, he said, voice strained, rehearsed. We're cooperating fully with corporate headquarters to resolve the situation. Until then, we ask for your patience and cooperation. No one clapped. No one nodded. They just watched. Elias didn't move, but the words that followed weren't spoken by him. They came from Dana Rios, broadcasting through the cabin's audio system. This is Dana Rios, Senior Protocol Director at Apex AeroTech. All passengers, please remain seated. This aircraft is under active review by corporate legal and compliance teams. Marissa Lane flinched at the voice. She looked toward Doyle in confusion, then back at her locked tablet. The voice continued. For transparency, we are confirming that passenger Dr. Elias Monroe is seated as part of a scheduled internal audit. Dr. Monroe is the CEO and principal shareholder of Apex AeroTech, parent company of Apex Air. The words hit the cabin like a thunderclap in a library. Passengers sat upright. A woman near the rear audibly gasped. In 2D, the woman with glasses whispered, "Oh my God," and across the aisle, Brad Whitmore's mouth opened, then shut again. He looked at Elias like seeing him for the first time, but Elias hadn't changed. He was still in the same soft gray sweater, still calm, still watching. It wasn't him that had changed. It was how they saw him. Nina Cho's phone buzzed wildly. Her live feed had exploded. The official announcement had just confirmed what she'd posted an hour earlier, and now it was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Reddit. News outlets from both coasts were scrambling for comment. The headline wrote itself. Black CEO denied first-class seat on his own aircraft. Then everything changed. Elias slowly rose from his seat, not to make a statement, not to gloat, but to make space for what needed to come next. He looked to Marissa first. She refused to meet his eyes. Then to Doyle, still silent. Then to the passengers. Let me be clear, Elias said, his voice firm but without hostility. I didn't board this plane today to provoke anyone. I didn't come here looking for conflict. I came to observe. He paused. To observe whether the values we write in our policy books are actually lived in our cabins. He gestured to the seat he had just left. And in this seat, without a title, without a badge, without a suit, I found my answer. Cody Lynn, the teenager in 1B, watched him with wide eyes. Elias continued. When I boarded, I did what we ask of every passenger. I showed respect. I followed procedures. I waited, and I was still told I didn't belong. He let the silence breathe. I've heard that before, in boardrooms, in interviews, in hotels, and now, on my own aircraft. Marissa finally spoke, her voice sharp with panic. You never told us who you were. Elias turned to her slowly. I didn't need to. But if we had known you would have treated me better, he asked. She hesitated. Yes. Elias nodded. And that, he said quietly, is the problem. A hush fell again. Captain Doyle's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth, but Dana's voice returned, this time with more weight. This is Apex AeroTech legal. Captain Doyle, Flight Attendant Lane, and Security Lead Stanmore stand down. Effective immediately. You are relieved of in-flight authority pending review. Gasps. Not from one row, from all of them. Elias stepped back, allowing the silence to settle. Then Rick Stanmore appeared, walking briskly down the aisle from the galley, his face hard. This is nonsense, he barked. He came in unmarked. How were we supposed to know Elias met him head-on? You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to treat me like any other passenger. And you failed. Rick scoffed, looking at Doyle for backup. The captain gave none. Nina Cho stood up. Her phone still recorded. Rick looked directly at her. You can stop filming now. She didn't even blink. No. Rick took a step forward, and then another voice, unfamiliar, deep, firm, rose from the rear of the cabin. I wouldn't advise that. Everyone turned. A tall black man in a navy blazer stood in row 4C. He was quiet, commanding, and until now had said nothing. His name tag, now visible, read Miles Travers, Senior Compliance Officer, Apex AeroTech. He walked forward calmly, nodding at Elias as he passed. I've been on board since boarding began, he said, witnessing everything firsthand. He turned to Rick. Your behavior is recorded, your threats are documented, and your clearance is revoked. Rick's jaw clenched. Then, wordlessly, he stepped aside and retreated to the back of the cabin. Miles turned to Elias and offered a quiet nod. Thank you for your patience, Dr. Monroe. Elias gave a small, tired smile. Thank you for not interrupting. The passengers sat motionless. It was like they'd forgotten they were on a plane. Elias turned to everyone now, addressing them not as CEO, but as a fellow traveler. This isn't about revenge, he said. It's about correction. He looked at each row, slowly. If a passenger can be treated like this, what else is happening when no one is watching? How many quiet wrongs have we allowed in the name of convenience? The screen at the front updated again. Full crew reassignment in progress. FAA notified. New captain en route. A few people clapped softly, then more. And finally, the cabin was filled with something that wasn't applause. It was relief. That the truth had a voice. That the quiet man in 1A didn't just hold power. He held the line. The atmosphere in the cabin had changed, but it hadn't softened. There was no celebration, no cheering, just a sobering quiet that sat thick between rows. Because everyone on board knew they were no longer just passengers on a delayed flight. They were witnesses to something historic. Elias Monroe sat quietly in seat 1A once more, eyes closed, head resting gently against the back cushion. But inside, his thoughts moved quickly. Dana Rios's voice returned in his ear, low and clipped. Elias, the audit is expanding. I've flagged 7 prior incidents involving this crew pairing, all sealed under discretionary resolution. He opened his eyes. By whom? Most of them by First Officer Blake or internal managers assigned to Doyle's crew rotations. At least 2 were redirected by senior HR without follow-up. Passengers, all minorities, all in business or first class. 3 filed bias claims. None received corporate response. Elias let out a slow breath. It wasn't surprise that tightened his chest. It was confirmation, the kind that stings because it proves you were right to be suspicious all along. He didn't reply immediately. He just watched. Across the aisle, Brad Whitmore sat uncomfortably, fidgeting in his seat. His platinum badge had slipped from his breast pocket and lay face down on the floor. But for the first time since boarding, he made no move to pick it up. He knew. Whatever security that badge once promised had dissolved with the morning light. Rick Stanmore hadn't returned to the cabin. Neither had Marissa Lane. Captain Doyle remained sealed inside the cockpit, awaiting the replacement crew. And yet the flight remained grounded, not because of a mechanical error, because of a moral one. Elias finally spoke. Dana. Begin full investigation into discretionary sealing practices from the last 36 months. Flag every case redirected by Blake, Doyle, or Lane. Already running. And, Dana, yes, open it to federal review. Let the FAA see everything. There was a long pause. You're sure? Yes, he said. No more shadows. He leaned back. Across the cabin, Nina Cho stood quietly, speaking with another passenger, a black woman in her late 40s who hadn't spoken until now. Her name was Angela, and she was flying home to Atlanta after visiting her daughter's college in the Bay Area. I watched the whole thing, Angela said softly. I wanted to say something sooner, but it felt like no one would care. You're not alone, Nina told her, and you didn't stay silent. You're speaking now. Angela nodded. That man, he didn't just stand up for himself. He stood up for all of us. From the rear of the cabin, Miles Trevors, the internal compliance officer, made his way slowly back toward Elias. His pace was deliberate, his posture respectful. He stopped just beside Elias's seat and waited for him to look up. I've completed the preliminary passenger interviews, Miles said. And there's no doubt about what happened here. Every witness account matches what the logs already show: implicit bias, procedural abuse, and coordinated suppression of complaint data. Elias looked him in the eye. You've reviewed the crew file history. Miles nodded. It's worse than we thought. Doyle's record includes 2 formal reprimands from his time at Sky Vista prior to Apex's acquisition. Both were flagged as isolated. Both were buried after internal restructuring. Let me guess, Elias said. Signed off by the same regional HR rep now overseeing this route? Correct. Elias turned away for a moment, staring out the window again. The runway stretched endlessly beyond the glass. So much movement had happened on this ground, planes taking off, travelers rushing forward, lives in motion. But this plane hadn't moved an inch. And yet, somehow, it had traveled farther than any flight he'd taken this year. He closed his eyes again, just for a second. And in the dark behind his eyelids, he heard his father's voice, quiet, measured. You build things, Elias. That's your gift. But someday, what you build will be tested, not by a storm, not by competition, but by the people inside it. That test had come. And now came the hardest part. What would he do with the results? Dana's voice returned. We've received a legal request from Apex's board liaison. They want to know if you intend to issue immediate suspensions for all involved staff or recommend reassignment. Elias's jaw tensed. Neither, he said. I want terminations, and I want public acknowledgement of the system failure. Dana hesitated. Just a beat. Elias, are you ready for the fallout? He looked around the cabin, saw the faces, the weight in their eyes. "Yes," he said, "because I've already lived the cost of silence. It's time they live the cost of action." From the front of the cabin, Miles received a notification on his tablet. He tapped twice, then looked up. FAA has just issued formal review notice. Media outlets are now calling this a landmark moment in airborne civil rights. Elias didn't smile. He didn't need to. He reached down and adjusted the cuff of his sweater, a small, steady motion that reminded him where he'd come from. Not from scandal, from structure. He built systems, and now he would rebuild this one. He turned to Miles. "I want a full briefing prepared for the board by end of day. We're not just correcting a crew, we're correcting a culture. I'll handle it personally." "Good." Across the aisle, Cody Lynn leaned toward Elias, his voice gentle. "Can I ask you something?" Elias turned. "Of course." "When all this happened, when they tried to move you, were you scared?" Elias thought for a moment. "I wasn't scared," he said, "but I was disappointed." "Why?" "Because I knew they'd done this before, just not to someone with the tools to expose it." Cody looked down, then back up. "Thank you for not backing down." Elias reached over and gently squeezed the young man's shoulder. "Thank you for not looking away." Behind them, Nina typed quickly, her post already forming in her mind. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard, and the skies will never be the same again. The hum inside the aircraft wasn't from the engines anymore. It came from the people, a low, steady undercurrent of breath, of shifting thoughts, of something awakening in real time, even without wheels lifting from the runway. Flight 214 had entered uncharted airspace. Dr. Elias Monroe stood once more, not out of pride, not out of performance. He stood because what was about to happen could not be done sitting down. At the front of the cabin, the main cabin monitor flickered, then displayed a new screen. The Apex AeroTech seal appeared beside the FAA compliance insignia. Passengers leaned forward. Phones were lifted. The screen read Apex AeroTech Public Resolution Notice, Flight 214. Elias turned to face the passengers, but he spoke to the entire airline industry. "We are a company that promises dignity in the skies, but we cannot offer dignity if we tolerate disrespect from the crew we entrust to carry lives." No one stirred. He continued. "In my quiet presence, I was tested not as a CEO, but as a black man, as a passenger expected to justify his worth for occupying space he had already paid for." Several passengers nodded. Others swallowed hard. Elias paused, effective immediately, and in accordance with company policy and federal aviation law. "I am executing personnel terminations based on gross misconduct, discrimination, and procedural fraud." He gestured to the screen as it updated Personnel Action Immediate Terminations. Captain Terrence Doyle, Flight Commander. Marissa Lane, Lead Flight Attendant. Rick Stanmore, Onboard Security. An audible breath escaped from several rows. Brad Whitmore, still in 1C, leaned back slowly, stunned. Cody Lynn whispered, "They're gone." Elias nodded once, but not silenced. "They'll have the right to appeal, publicly and legally, because we don't silence people. We hold them to account." From the back of the aircraft, Miles Trevors, still standing near Galley 2, gave a small approving nod. Behind him, a new crew, quiet, focused, professional, stood ready to take over. None of them wore smugness, just steady hands and eyes that said, "We're here to do it right." The monitor continued to scroll. Federal audit sealed complaint policy under review reform. Timeline immediate implementation across Apex network. Angela, the woman from 5B, raised her hand, unsure if she could speak. Elias saw her and offered a gentle nod. She stood slowly. "I've been flying for 20 years, she said. "And I've sat through a lot of moments where things didn't feel right. Moments where I felt like I had to shrink to stay safe." The cabin was silent again, but today I saw someone who didn't shrink. And because of that, maybe next time, none of us will have to. Applause began in the center of the cabin. It didn't erupt. It rose, like warmth, like sunrise, not performative, but grateful. Elias let the sound pass through him before speaking again. "I didn't come on this flight to make a scene. I came because I needed to know if I were not a CEO, if I wore no title, if I was just a black man in seat 1A, would I still be seen?" His voice didn't shake, but hearts did. And now we know the answer, and we won't forget it. The screen updated once more. Corporate apology to passenger doctor. Elias Monroe to be issued publicly media statement scheduled for 2:00 p.m. EST. Elias turned to Dana, still connected via his earpiece. "Send the formal message to PR. Use real language, no euphemisms, no unfortunate misunderstandings." Dana's voice came back, steady. "It's done, and Elias, yes, I've worked for Apex for 11 years. I've never been prouder than I am right now." He smiled softly. "I'm not proud yet, Dana, but we're getting there." He disconnected the line. Beside him, Cody leaned over, voice quiet. "You could have humiliated them, but you didn't." Elias turned, meeting his gaze. "I'm not here to break people." "Cody, I'm here to break systems. Why not do both? Because if you break people and leave the system standing, it just replaces them with someone worse." Cody let that settle, then nodded. In row 7, a father leaned toward his daughter, whispering, "Remember this flight." And she, no more than 12, nodded slowly, eyes wide. Elias stepped aside as the new flight crew moved forward. The new captain, an older Latina woman named Captain Mariana Cruz, approached him first. "Dr. Monroe," she said, extending her hand. "Captain Cruz," he said, shaking it. "You've cleared a storm I've been flying under for years." "I didn't do it alone," he replied. She smiled. "That's why it'll last this time." The plane buzzed with a different kind of energy now, the kind that comes after a reckoning, the kind that asks what now. Elias took his seat again, but not to retreat, to reflect. He stared out the window. The tarmac, once a place of waiting, now felt like a runway again. Something had shifted, something had lifted, and just before the new crew began cabin announcements, a ping sounded from Elias's watch, a message from his sister. Mom would have cried today, but proud tears. He smiled, then wiped one away himself, not because he was sad, but because in a world that so often made men like him invisible, today he had chosen not to disappear. He had chosen to be seen and to make others seen with him. As the aircraft finally prepared for takeoff, the passengers settled. Some still whispered, some wrote, some stared into space, replaying everything they had just lived through. And as the wheels began to roll, Elias felt something deep inside shift again, not peace, but clarity. This was not the end of a flight. It was the beginning of a movement. The wheels lifted off the tarmac with a gentle pull. A strange hush fell over the cabin, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just occurred. Flight 214 was finally airborne. But no one aboard would remember this flight for its destination. They would remember how it made them feel, how it made them think. Elias Monroe leaned back into seat 1A, his seat, his rightfully earned seat. The hum of the engines filled the space around him, but his mind was elsewhere, not in the cabin, not even in the sky. It was racing across thousands of screens, phones, tablets, televisions where headlines were now screaming. Black CEO grounds plane, fires entire crew mid-flight. Quiet power doctor. Monroe's historic move sparks industry-wide reform. From humiliation to history. What really happened on Flight 214. The words didn't shake him, but they didn't satisfy him either. He wasn't chasing headlines. He never was. He was chasing something quieter, something deeper. Justice, truth, and a future where no one had to become a symbol just to be treated with respect. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. The new flight attendants moved smoothly, respectfully. Their voices were calm, free of performance, free of panic. Captain Mariana Cruz came on over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're now cruising at 30,000 feet. Flight time to Washington, D.C. is approximately 4 hours and 12 minutes. On behalf of the new flight team, we thank you for your patience and your courage." The cabin gave a soft, sincere round of applause. Elias exhaled slowly. From across the aisle, Nina Cho, still scrolling on her phone, leaned forward. "They're calling it the Monroe Protocol," she said softly. He turned to her. "I never wanted a protocol named after me." "I know," she replied. "That's probably why it matters." She showed him her screen, a live poll on a news app. Should more companies empower CEOs to take direct action against discrimination in real time? Yes, 89%. No, 8% not sure. 3%. Elias gave a small, dry smile. Public support always comes after the storm. Nina nodded, but that storm had to start somewhere. In row 8, a teenage girl named Maya turned to her mother, whispering, "Is he famous now?" Her mother whispered back, "He was already important. Now the world just knows why." Further down the cabin, Angela had taken out a notebook. She wasn't a journalist, but she felt compelled to write. She was composing a letter to her daughter. "You will grow up in a world where one man said enough at 30,000 feet, and things changed. Always remember, it's never the volume of your voice. It's the clarity of your conviction." In the cockpit, Captain Cruz adjusted the autopilot, then turned to her co-pilot. "You ever seen anything like that?" she asked. "Not in 20 years of flying," he replied. "Me neither." They didn't need to say more. Back in seat 1A. Elias was once again staring out the window, watching the clouds roll by in slow waves. The view was beautiful, but he couldn't quite enjoy it. His phone buzzed again, a message from his longtime board member and friend, Lionel Grant. You just changed everything. We're in emergency session now. What you did was necessary, but not everyone will see it that way." Elias typed back simply, "Then they never understood the mission." He slid the phone into the seat pocket and looked down at his hands. They were steady, but the toll was beginning to catch up. The adrenaline was gone. Now came the crash, the self-doubt, the quiet voice that asked, "Did I go too far?" He closed his eyes and let the questions come. Would the board back him fully? Would the stockholders see the long game? Would he become the target instead of the catalyst? And most haunting of all, would this truly lead to change? That last one stayed with him. Because this wasn't the first time he'd seen public outrage. It wasn't the first time a man of color was humiliated in public. The difference was, this time, the man humiliated had the power to respond, and he had used it. Now the world had to decide what to do with that. His thoughts were interrupted by a tap on his arm. It was Cody Lynn, still holding his notebook. "Can I ask one more thing?" Cody said quietly. Elias looked up and nodded. "How do you stay calm when people try to break you?" Elias took his time answering. "Because I've already been broken," he said. "And I built myself back with pieces they can't touch character. memory, and truth. Cody blinked, a little stunned. That's real. It's the only thing that is. A few rows back, a man who hadn't spoken all flight, an elderly gentleman with silver hair and dark eyes, stood and addressed the cabin. "I served in the Air Force for 33 years, he began. "I've seen good leadership. I've seen bad. But today I saw something rare. All heads turned. Leadership that didn't shout, didn't posture, just stood its ground and reminded the rest of us what that ground should look like." Another wave of quiet applause. Elias dipped his head slightly, humbled. The man returned to his seat. Nina turned to Elias again. "Do you think this will change other airlines?" "I don't care if it does," he replied. "I care that we changed this one." And that was the truth. Big change doesn't always come all at once. It starts with a crack, a single ray of light through a system designed to keep people in the dark. Flight 214 was now a ray, and Elias Monroe, reluctant symbol, quiet architect, had cracked something open. He just hoped the light would keep shining long after the landing gear came down. By the time Flight 214 began its descent into Washington, D.C., the world below had already exploded. News vans were parked outside Apex AeroTech's headquarters in Arlington. Hashtags were trending across the globe. Monroe Protocol, Error Seat Money, Flyfair. The company's social media team had stopped trying to respond to every mention. Their internal Slack channels were flooded with screenshots, praise, backlash, threats, and letters of support from staff who had waited years to see the silence finally broken. Elias Monroe knew the second his feet hit the jet bridge, the next storm would begin. Not from passengers, not from strangers, but from his own boardroom. The descent announcement buzzed through the cabin. Passengers sat in a kind of reverent stillness. No one fidgeted. No one checked their watch. They had become part of something bigger than a flight. A movement had started, and they had seats on the front row. Captain Mariana Cruz made her final address over the intercom. "To all those on board, thank you. Not just for flying with us, but for bearing witness. It's not every day an aircraft becomes a courtroom and a classroom." Elias smiled softly. He didn't clap. He just let the words settle around him like the final page of a chapter. Beside him, Cody Lynn slipped a folded note into Elias's palm. "Don't open it yet," Cody said. "Wait until you're off the plane." Elias nodded. As the wheels touched down, the cabin erupted into a low wave of applause. But Elias didn't rise with it. He waited until the cabin emptied. Every passenger, every glance, every unspoken nod of thanks. Then he stood, alone. Captain Cruz was waiting at the front of the plane. She extended her hand again. "Whatever happens next," she said, "they can't take this back from you." "They'll try," he replied, "but you'll still be Elias Monroe," she said. He looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't speaking from admiration. She was speaking from experience. He stepped onto the jet bridge, Cody's note still warm in his hand. The airport terminal looked ordinary. But nothing about this day had been. Apex's corporate SUV was waiting curbside. Elias stepped in without a word, flanked by two internal comms officers who avoided eye contact. No small talk. No welcome back, just silent urgency, the kind that comes before a war meeting. When he entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was already sharp. 15 chairs, 12 of them occupied. High-rise windows reflected D.C. skyline, but the view couldn't soften the tension inside. Lionel Grant, his closest ally on the board, was already standing. "Glad you made it back," Lionel said. The others didn't stand, didn't smile. The chair of the board, Cynthia Vale, mid-50s, crisp white blazer, and sharper eyes tapped the table twice. "Let's begin," she said. Elias remained standing. Cynthia leaned back. "You executed 3 terminations, grounded a flight, triggered an FAA compliance review, and tanked our stock 7%, all in a single morning." "I executed accountability," Elias replied. "At what cost? At the cost of pretending we stand for values we don't enforce." A silence fell. Then another voice. Daniel Wu, head of international operations, spoke up. "There are shareholders demanding clarification. Some are calling for temporary suspension of your authority pending independent review." Lionel bristled. "You're joking." "I'm not," Daniel said. "We've already been served notice." Elias nodded. "I expected as much." "You're not going to defend yourself," Cynthia asked. "I'm not here to defend power. I'm here to prove it belongs to people who use it responsibly." Cynthia's jaw tightened. "You humiliated senior staff in public. You made the airline look unstable." "I exposed what was already unstable," Elias replied. "I just didn't let us hide it anymore." From the back of the room, a younger board member named Sophia Hart cleared her throat. "Do we even realize what this moment is? The man in seat 1A got discriminated against on his own plane, and we're mad that it cost us points on the market. Perception is everything," Cynthia snapped. "No," Elias said. "Integrity is everything." He looked around the table, slowly. "I didn't plan what happened, but I made sure we didn't bury it. And I'll do it again if we don't learn from it." Lionel stood beside him now. "If Apex doesn't want to be the company that leads reform, we can let someone else do it. But we'll be the ones answering for why we lost the moment." "Enough," Cynthia said, pressing her palms flat on the table. "This is a crisis meeting, not a revolution." Elias turned fully toward her now. "Maybe that's the problem. We keep treating justice like it's a disruption when it's supposed to be the product." The silence returned. He placed his phone on the table and tapped play. A clip played aloud Marissa Lane's voice from the flight. "You don't look like someone who belongs in 1A." Gasps in the room, not from shock, but from undeniable clarity. "That wasn't taken from a passenger," Elias said. "It was from our internal surveillance. I have hours more. Should I keep playing?" No one answered. "That's what we're defending when we worry about the stock. That's what we're excusing when we stay quiet." He turned to Lionel. "Schedule a full employee town hall tomorrow. Live broadcast. I'll speak. No script." Lionel nodded. Cynthia didn't stop him, because she couldn't. The silence in the room had changed, not defeat, resignation. They knew they'd lost the high ground the moment the world heard the tape. Elias stepped back. "I'll take whatever review process is required, but let the record show I'm not afraid to lose my seat to make this flight safer for everyone else." He picked up his phone and left the room. Lionel followed. "Proud of you," he said. Elias didn't respond. He was already unfolding the note from Cody. Inside were 4 words, handwritten in uneven ink. "Keep making room for us." Elias read it twice, then tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. It was just after 3:00 p.m. when the cameras went live, across every Apex AeroTech office, on airport screens, staff lounges, break rooms, and thousands of laptop screens from Seattle to Singapore. The stream began. No dramatic music, no glossy introduction, just a single camera, a plain background, and a man sitting alone. Dr. Elias Monroe. He wore a dark navy shirt, no tie, no lapel pin, no CEO badge, just himself. He looked into the camera for several seconds before speaking. "Thank you for giving me your time today. I know some of you are watching from Apex hubs, others from home, and some from airport gates with one eye on the clock. Wherever you are, thank you." He exhaled. I want to talk to you not just as your CEO, but as a fellow traveler, a man who boarded a plane yesterday hoping for peace and found something else entirely. No slides appeared behind him, no headlines, just his voice. I was told I didn't belong in a seat I had paid for, not because of protocol, not because of policy, but because someone looked at me and decided I wasn't who I said I was. He paused, and in that moment, I realized something. I could either sit there quietly and accept it, or I could stand not to shout, but to show. People across the country leaned closer to their screens. Elias continued, I chose to stand because every day millions of people board planes carrying more than just luggage. They carry invisible weights, the weight of being questioned, of being profiled, of being told without words, you don't belong. He looked down for a second, then back up. And if the CEO of a global airline can be mistaken for a fraud in his own seat, what does that say about how far we still have to go? In a Denver office, a Latina gate agent wiped her eyes. In a Boston hangar, a black mechanic whispered, finally. Elias pressed on. This is not about revenge. I don't want apologies scripted from lawyers. I want transformation. I want every crew member, every manager, every staffer from the tarmac to the tower to know this dignity is not optional. It's the boarding pass every human being is entitled to. He adjusted his posture, eyes still focused, voice still steady. To those of you who fear this change will be uncomfortable, I understand. It will be, but fairness often begins with discomfort, because it disrupts the silence that has kept so many wrongs hidden. He paused again. In the past 24 hours, I've been called a hero, a headline, a disruptor, and a mistake. I'm none of those. I'm just a man who got tired of waiting for someone else to fix what I knew I could change. On the side screens, messages began flashing in from employees watching from Sao Paulo. We needed this. Thank you for speaking the truth. You made me proud to wear this uniform again. Elias saw them, but he didn't smile. He kept speaking. To those who've said this hurts the company, I say silence was hurting us more. Quiet tolerance of misconduct is not stability. It's rot. And I refuse to lead a company that hides its cracks beneath the carpet. He leaned forward slightly. This isn't about one flight. This is about a culture, one that too often gives power to people who haven't earned the right to use it. That ends here. He glanced down, pulled a folded note from his pocket, and opened it. 4 handwritten words. Keep making room for us. He held the note up for the camera. This came from a teenage passenger on Flight 214. His name is Cody, and whether he meant it or not, those 4 words are now the heart of everything I believe we can become. He set the note down slowly. I'm announcing today the Monroe Initiative, a multi-year, transparent, publicly audited effort to restructure our hiring, training, and accountability systems. We'll publish our first quarterly report in 90 days, and we'll involve passengers in feedback forums that matter. Across the globe, the stream was being screen-recorded, reposted, and quoted live. But Elias was still just talking, as if he were speaking to one person. And maybe he was. Some will say I acted too boldly. Others will say I acted too late. I don't care which story gets printed. I care about the one we choose to write from this moment forward. He stood now. The camera panned slightly. But this moment wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone who's ever been made to feel small in a space they earned. To every silent nod, every lowered gaze, every clenched jaw that kept the peace at the cost of dignity. He stepped forward, into frame. I am not resigning. I am not retreating. I am rebuilding. And with that, the stream ended. No music, no fade, just a black screen. And the words Seat 1A was only the beginning. The responses were immediate. The Apex stock, which had fallen 7%, rebounded 4 points within the hour. News anchors called it the most honest corporate address in a decade. Airlines across the globe issued internal memos citing Monroe-style reviews. At airports, gate agents stood a little straighter. At terminals, passengers looked at one another with a little more awareness. And at a small apartment in D.C., Cody Lynn sat on his bed watching the stream replay. He smiled, then folded up his copy of the note. He didn't know it yet, but someday he'd apply to Apex AeroTech. And he'd walk into that interview not just with a resume, but with a story about a man who didn't raise his voice, but who made the world stop and listen anyway. Not every revolution begins with shouting. Some begin with one man refusing to move seats. Dr. Elias Monroe didn't just protect his place in first class, he protected the dignity of thousands who are questioned, overlooked, and dismissed every day. He reminded us that real leadership doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to shrink. This wasn't just a flight. It was a reckoning, one that held up a mirror to the quiet ways we judge, exclude, and protect broken systems. And in that mirror, we all had to ask ourselves, would I have stood up? Would I have spoken out as the dust settles? This story isn't about one airline, one policy, or one CEO. It's about all of us and the kind of world we want to board next. If this story moved you, share it. If it opened your eyes, subscribe. If it made you feel seen, comment where you're watching from. We want to hear your voice, because as long as people like Elias exist, there's hope that someday every seat, no matter the raw, will come with respect. Like, share, subscribe, and stay with us. More stories of justice, courage, and quiet power are just one boarding pass away.